good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. And I look very much forward to share this event with you over the next 2 days. So what I'm going to talk about is how to address the challenges that Johan raised in his presentation. And I'm going to do that by talking about different approaches that could be used in moving towards a CLM. And it's really going to be a story about 2 very different ways of doing it. And to tell that story, I'm going to use 2 characters I've created. And some of you might recognize them from last year. We're going to revisit them and see how they're doing on the digitalization journey. So we have these 2 characters. It's Mr. Penguin. He's a traditional old school businessman who's been in business for more than 100 years. He's a 3rd generation penguin running the company. And we have Mr. Deer, who is a more modern, visionary, ambitious businessman. So I want to make a little remark on these 2 pictures. And that is that these pictures were created by generative AI based on prompts I did. And it was a simple prompting, text-based prompting I did, and out of it came these pictures. I did no post-processing or anything. And I'm not a guy who can do graphics. I must say this was sort of a eye-opener to me that we can now do these things these days. And of course, I'll get back to that later in my presentation, how we might exploit generative AI in this work of implementing CLM. But for now, let me talk a bit more about these 2 characters and their companies and illustrate how they are going about doing digital transformation, and let's try to make some conclusions based on that. So Mr. Penguin, he's running a company called Penguin Incorporated, and his approach is a process-driven approach. So he wants to improve a process at a time. So he's finding places in the company that he thinks could be improved, and then he starts a project and improves it. So I've used Penguin for process-driven, just to remind myself what his sort of way of thinking is. And he has a saying that 1 step at a time has brought us to where we are today. The other character, Mr. Deer, is running Deer Incorporated, and he has this data-driven approach. So his saying is, data is king. And if you follow me a bit on the journey here, let's see what they're doing. And these 2 are manufacturing companies. And they are like most manufacturing companies in the B2B space. They do both configure to order and engineer to order. So that's the situation we have with both of them. So in Penguin, they do fish packaging machines. They support CTO on the simpler fish packages where they sell a lot. But they also do ETO on the large scale machines with demanding customers that come at a high price. So it's worthwhile for them to do ETO. It's similar in Deer Incorporated. They do forestry equipment. And again, they have this mix of CTO and ETO. Again, these drawings, just to illustrate the kind of products they do, were automatically generated by text to image generative AI. At Penguin and Deer, they both have traditional value chains where at the high level we have these 4 areas of engineering, sales, manufacturing, and service, which when we talk CLM, we typically wrap up into the circle, which I'm basically standing on here in the audience, in the studio. And that's not unusual. That's what you see in manufacturing companies at large. That's the main value chains you have. And you use the value chains to develop your products, bring them to market, and service them. And what manufacturing companies are experiencing is that there's a natural increased complexity in the products for some of the reasons that Johan mentioned. But not only do they have to struggle with increasing complex products, they also have challenges due to a couple of critical processes that relates to the life cycle of the products. So I tried to illustrate this in a little graphic here. The graphic might seem rather complicated, but in fact, it's a highly simplified scenario of how it is in real life. So we have sort of 2 life cycles playing together in a complex manner here. So if you look at the first axis, you have the life cycle of a product's configuration. So that's an individual product being configured to an order, manufactured, delivered, and serviced. And on the other direction, you have the life cycle of product development. So that's the definition of the product you bring to market and how it develops over time. And of course, when you launch a product, you go through development in some phases, and then finally you launch it to market. And as soon as you've done that, sales can start creating proposals for customers on this new product. The typical thing is it'll go through a number of revisions. You'll present the proposal to the customer. They'll have some feedback or might have changed their mind, so you will have to update it. So there's a life cycle of the proposals you generate to the customers. Now, this might take a while, and it's not unusual. This can take months, depending on what kind of equipment we're talking about. And in the meantime, you might have an update to your product definition. So it could be new features or other stuff you found out how to do that you want to offer to the market. It also could be that there's features you don't no longer have in the products because there's a better way to do it now. So you need to update the proposal. So there, this other life cycle plays in and gets intertwined with the first one. Now I assume that you get an order from the customer, you build it, you install it, and then the customer might update it over some years while using the product. And every time the configuration could change. When you change parts on it or enhances the product, you could have a new configuration. So there's a life cycle of the configuration of the product that changes over its time while the customer is using it. And this goes on. Even after the customer has taken possession of the product, you might change the definitions of the product because you might have a way to modernize it so the customer can buy a modernization kit or an upgrade to it and continue to use it. And this is something we typically see in our customer base, that this is something they offer. So again, you need to update the configuration in a new offer based on what the customer already has. So this is a part of the picture of the complexity, not just the products, but also these life cycles. And when we look at how to do digital transformation in manufacturing companies, we think it's very important to think about all these three dimensions of complexity: the product, the two different life cycles. So let's return to our two imaginary companies and our two characters and see how they're going about doing a digital transformation. So we'll go back to 2016, where they both decide to start a digital transformation journey because it's obvious they need to do something about the business to stay relevant in the current market. So in Penguin, they realized one of the bottlenecks is in sales. It takes too long to get quotations out, and they're being beaten by competitors because they can do it faster now, and the customers don't want to wait too long. So they're losing orders. So they initiate a CPQ project to streamline the process. They select a sales tool, CPQ tool that has a very appealing UI. The sales reps get very excited about the nice looking UI, the graphics and everything, so they go for that one. And they keep the cost down to a minimum to get value out quickly. In Deere, they take a slightly different approach. They are also realizing they need to do something about the sales process and improve the CPQ part of it. But they just hired a new chief digitalization officer. And he's raising his hand and saying, that's fine, but please just take a step back and let's make sure we align the data with all business units in the company as we go ahead, because that will benefit us in the long run and on our digitalization journey. So they get engineering involved, although it's sort of driven by sales. They have attended some of the CLM Summits and accept the CLM vision and want to go for that. And they decide to find a tool that can help them on the journey. And from the outset, they decide to integrate to ERP. So they also get the CPQ solution going, but they've done it slightly differently. And the setup at Deere now is sort of illustrated in this diagram here. So you have ACE in the middle as the platform for CLM, and they decided to go for Salesforce as their opportunity management tool for their salespeople. So they utilize that you can integrate ACE and Salesforce to make sure that when sales reps are working in Salesforce, they get access to the product information in ACE. And the product information in ACE is sourced and enriched from different sources. So they already have SAP in place to control manufacturing. So a natural thing is to orchestrate the data, bring them together, take those from ERP and use them in the overall definition of what your products are, join it up with your PLM system. And here they have a PLM system from PTC that has part of the truth as well. And then the typical thing is there is some legacy system that also has some information that could be relevant. So the approach they took at Deere to get a single source of truth is really to take a shared source of truth. So they're joined up the different sources and they are aligning and adding what they need using ACE in the middle and then making it available to the sales rep. So that's what they did in 2016. Now let's move forward. 2018 hits and competitors are making a move. So both companies realize that now the competitors have a dealer portal and a customer self-service. So they are moving ahead on the digitalization journey and they want to follow up. So what would they do? Well, the penguin approach would be, whoa, dealer selling, we didn't thought about that when we did the CPQ project for our sales rep. That's we need to start a new project. And it might be the situation that the original vendor for the CPQ solution does not have a good offer for a dealer portal, so they might start a new search process, implement that. Similar thing could happen for customer self-service. Deere, on the other hand, is in a better position because they focused on the data and the shared source of truth. So now getting a dealer portal and a customer self-service portal is more a question of adding an access point, adding a UI to the already existing data. And when the platform is quite open and flexible on doing integrations, they can do this very efficiently. So the setup you now have at Deere is something like this. So on the sales channel side, they have now two more access points. They have a dealer portal and they have a self-service portal to supplement what they have for their own sales rep, all based on the same product information. So they all agree on what can be offered to the market and what's the right version of the products. And the typical thing we see is that companies that implement this setup, they will utilize that you have this omni-channel offering approach. So there might be a request coming in from the dealer portal where they are configuring the product to some extent, and then they reach out and have a question about something where they want some assistance. And then the sales rep in the company can pick it up from Salesforce and take the dialogue based on what the customer or the dealer has already done themselves and complete the process from there. So a very efficient and smooth way of doing it. So let's move a bit ahead and see what's happening in the years to come. So 2020, COVID hits the world. A big disruption. Nobody had seen this coming. And it has a lot of effect on manufacturing companies. There are factory shutdowns. And one of the perhaps surprising, unforeseen disruptions were supply chain disruptions. So suddenly there are parts you can't get. Very noticeably was the shortage of semiconductors that typically come from parts of Asia and were needed in other parts of the world. And the factory shut down, so they didn't manufacture them. The logistics broke down, you couldn't get them. There was already high demand, it exploded. So it became a big issue. But it was not only semiconductors, it was all kind of parts that suddenly got hard to get because of the breakdown of the logistics. So you have to react to that. So with the penguin approach, what are you going to do? This is a new thing you hadn't thought about. You're going to start a project. You're going to figure it out. It's going to take time. With the Deere approach, you're in a much better place because what this is about is really controlling your product definition to the market. So by having that in a centralized place, you could try to steer demand away from the problematic versions of your product by adding rules saying, please don't offer these versions of the product for the future. You can look at this shared source of truth, go through your order bank, find out what products are affected by the parts shortage, and try to find replacement orders you could offer for the customer. This is something you can do very efficiently because you have the data accessible in a shared point of truth. And we have customers who can explain how they were able to react to this very, very quickly and do their best to control the effects of the supply chain disruption. Now, 2 years ahead, 2022, we have war in Europe, and there's a lot of bad effects of that. Of course, again, there are supply chain disruptions, and now there are also embargo rules. So you can be fined if you accidentally sell the wrong parts to the wrong region. So how are we going to control that? In the Penguin approach, this is like new process, new problem, what are we going to do? In the Deer approach, you can utilize your shared source of truth, make sure you impose rules that disallow the sales teams from offering certain products in certain regions, and you can feel pretty safe that you are not violating any of the embargo rules and can be fined. So this is sort of what happened up to last year. So let's look at what's been happening since. So last year, the world went crazy on generative AI. And in March of 2023, there was a bunch of announcements coming out. So ChatGPT was launched, and it reached 100 million users in 2 months. That's the fastest adoption of anything ever that's been launched in IT. Microsoft is announcing they want to use ChatGPT in all the Office products as co-pilots to increase productivity. Google releases an AI, and OpenAI is expanding ChatGPT to not only be a chatbot, but also being able to browse the web and integrate to external products. A lot of things happened. And for me, the big thing that really changed here in AI, because AI has been a research topic for years, what really changed here is that somebody found out how to crack the holy grail of how can you communicate with a computer using natural language. And that's extremely difficult, because if you communicate in natural language, there's a lot of implicit knowledge about the world you need to have to make sense of what's communicated. And up until around last year, nobody has cracked that nut, but it happened last year, and that's a big change. So of course, if we go back to our companies, they notice this, and they want to make value out of it. And what Penguin is doing is like, wow, let's use this language model, AI, to create the orders. It'll save us a lot of work, because they realize, and you can easily check that when you go into something like ChatGPT, that it already knows a lot about Penguin Incorporated's product. It knows a lot about these fish packers. And it knows that because it scraped basically everything in the world, all knowledge in the world, it's been trained on it. So it knows about fish packers. So they realize, oh, why don't we just ask our sales reps and our dealers and our customers, just go to ChatGPT, ask it to help you out on getting a quotation for a fish packer. Easy peasy, money saved, which is what Penguin really like. But let's stop for a second and think about how's that going to work out. It seems appealing, and they might have swallowed the hype in Penguin and sort of got very passionate and engaged about it, but there's a serious problem. They quickly start getting strange orders they cannot do. They have customers who are promised stuff they're not able to deliver. They're trying to produce stuff that doesn't work. So it ends out being a pretty disappointing situation for Penguin Incorporated. And they can get into real trouble. I mean, this could be a threat for the company. If you get into these kind of situations that you cannot fulfill your orders, or you have to do a lot of rework to make things operate correctly. In Deer, they take a different approach. They do realize that these language models coming out can handle dialogues very efficiently in natural language. But they have their shared source of truth with respect to the product, and they feel more comfortable taking an approach where they join up the two worlds, so they use their product information, which they know is accurate, and instead they're gonna add an AI assistant that can be used throughout the different channels. and this is going to work. And I'm going to talk more about why this is going to work. And you can see Mr. Deere is quite happy, so he ordered a portrait of himself in the style of Van Gogh, of course created by a generative AI, but I think you can appreciate that you can generate a picture with a particular style by just asking a generative AI language to image generator to do it. And again, I'm myself impressed by what you can do with so little skills as I have in digital crafting. So the overall setup at Deere now looks something like this. So they still have the dealer portal, the Salesforce tool for their sales reps, and the self-service portal. But they are now adding this generative AI as a capability. So they're adding it sort of in front on the side of their CLM solution, and then make it available in a different sales channel. They're still using all the existing connections and processes which they have seen now works and ensure correct orders, but they just has now a different way, a co-pilot way, to get to the orders and the quotations you'd like. So they prefer this approach as Deere, and they launched it, and it works to some extent, which is how these are. Sometimes they help you, sometimes they don't, but they don't see any bad orders coming in because their CLM system is not going to allow that to pass through. So I find this an interesting approach because they now also have a chance to sort of ride on the wave of all the rapid development that happens in generative AI. Because they're not based it on one particular generative AI, they put up a scheme where they use whatever generative AI is available to help them get to what they want in their existing systems. And this is a clever move because come 2024, in fact, just Monday of this week, there's a new announcement coming out from OpenAI. They have a new version of a GPT called GPT-4o, O for Omni, and Omni here really means omnimodal. So it means it's now capable of efficiently joining up different sources of interaction. It can be audio, it can be images, vision, and it can be text that it can combine up. And they are doing it in real time. If you haven't seen the announcement, I'll encourage you to spend a little bit of time seeing some of the demonstrations of what generative AI is now capable of. And I picked just two screenshots here because I want to make a point about these two, but there are others that are quite impressive in this respect. So in the top screen dump I picked, there are two people sitting on a table having their smartphone down on the table, and they've opened up the ChatGPT app on their phone. And the guy on the one side only speaks English, the other one only Spanish. And then they open the ChatGPT and say, please, you need to help us. I only speak English, so whenever I speak English, please translate to Spanish. And when he responds in Spanish, please translate back to English. And ChatGPT says, okay. And there it goes in real time. They have a conversation, two different languages. It's going pretty smooth and fast. So there are a couple of impressive things by that. One is that the translation is pretty good, better than ever before. But I'm also impressed by how they instruct the AI to do what they're supposed to do. Because they just ask in natural language, this is the situation, this is what I want you to do. So it's not like we're used to, you have to open an app, you have to find the right menu, you have to say English to Spanish and back and forth. It's a totally different way of interacting. And I think that part of it is really going to change how we work with computers. The one below it is a little bit different. So that's where you can invite a ChatGPT into a meeting. So you see four faces and a little icon there on the left, and the icon on the left is the ChatGPT. And it's now a meeting participant. I felt a little bit scared when I looked at that one, but it's now a meeting participant you can talk to during the meeting. So it participates like anybody else, just by voice. So you can ask it questions, and very nicely at the end, you can just ask it to summarize what happened in the meeting, because note-taking is often something nobody wants to do, but you can just have the chat interface do it. So it's coming to this new way of interacting very naturally like you would do with a human. And of course, we should try to make use of that. People will expect this will be sort of the table stakes, so we should try to make use of it. And I think the approach Steer took is a good way forward to make use of it. So let me just talk in the last minutes here about why does this combination work. So there's some fascinating stuff about the generative AI, but there's also some problems with it. And I think the problem is summarized very well if you go to OpenAI's website and want to place a prompt for their ChatGPT. Just beneath the prompt, it says ChatGPT can make mistakes, check important info. It doesn't say how, but it just says you cannot trust it. You have to figure it out. And that's where the combination between generative AI and configuration technology like we develop in Configit might have an important role. Because what we do is all about absolute truth, the best knowledge you have in the company about what works and doesn't work. And if you combine that with the generative AI, you can have a very powerful combination. So I try to illustrate a little bit in the diagram there on the right. So generative AI understands natural language. In ACE, it's very formal, accurate, precise language. You can do omnimodal, meaning you can talk to it, you can show it pictures, you can even hand draw diagrams and it'll understand it. And in ACE, it's very logical form rules that are very precise and accurate. There are hard restrictions on how you have to formulate them, so make sure they cannot be misunderstood. Generative AI is quite good at proposing ideas, coming up with proposals. And in ACE, you are sure it's compliant with whatever you want it to be compliant with in the organization. Generative AI can make mistakes. ACE is about making sure things are true. And this combination is beginning to trend in the market. And I just want to point to one example of this developed by Google. It's a system called Alpha Geometry, which is quite impressive at solving math problems. So what they did was to solve some geometry problems from an international math Olympiad. And without going into all the details here, it scored 25. And the best mathematicians in the world participating in the Olympiad, on average, scored 25.9. So it's getting to the level of the best mathematicians in the world on these type of problems. And the point about getting it into an AI, from my point of perspective, is that if you can make a computer do that, you can make this accessible to 100 million of people who'd like to have powers in doing geometry math. It's not easy to copy these brilliant mathematicians 100 million times, but it's no deal when you put it into an AI. So this could be at the hands of everybody. So that's impressive. And what I found interesting is the way they did it is that they have a language model, generative AI, and then they have a symbolic engine. They use the generative AI to generate ideas for proofs, solutions to the problems, and then they have a symbolic engine that verifies the proof is correctly. And then they run that in a loop until they get a solution. That's very briefly how it works. And of course, you can do that 10,000 times because it's a computer. You just do it, and bang, they solve it very fast. And it's sort of the similar approach that they took at Deer, where you could say that the generative part is something it could be ChatGPT, it could be whatever Apple or Google or Microsoft is coming up with to handle that part of it. And then you could use the VT technology and the configuration engine to make sure you're not being fooled and not making mistakes. I sometimes think of these generative AIs as being a little bit like a very helpful friend who always have an answer to a problem you have, but they're not always right. And you want to take the advice when it's right, but how do you know when it's right? And this is an approach you could use to make the best of two worlds. Make sure you use the power of generative AI, but can trust whatever comes out of it. So with that, I'd like to end my presentation and hand over back to you, Shahid. Thank you.